In the 7th century, Arab expansion carried a rigid new worldview into Africa. The world was divided into two realms, Dar al-Islam, the House of Peace, and Dar al-Harb, the House of War. They expected a marvel. Instead, they encountered the pupil smitters, Nubian archers, so precise, so lethal. For 5 years, they laid siege to Dongola, but the land of the bow did not break. The Arab commanders finally understood that total conquest of Nubia was impossible, so they created a diplomatic
Keep your
escape.
kingdom, but you send us your people as an annual
The
tribute.
Bakht Treaty, a covenant by coercion, 360 human beings. Every year, a steady river of stolen lives flowing north through Egypt into Arab lands. This was the beginning of the Ma'afa. Blocked in the south, the tide of war turned west, into Tamadza, the land of the free, what we now call Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. But here, the invaders met a different resistance. At its center stood the queen of the Ores, Dia, the woman history tried to bury and legend refused to forget. In 692 AD, she did not merely halt the Arab advance, she shattered it. Driving the armies back toward Egypt, carved out 5 fragile years of freedom for her people. But this empire does not retreat forever. They returned. To starve them, Dihya made a critical choice. She chose ash over chains. The harvests burned. The land was stripped bare. With nothing left to survive on, many of her people turned toward Egypt. But the final blade came from within. Khalid, a prisoner she raised as a son. He became the spy who destroyed her. Betrayed by Mercy, the queen fell. And with her fall, the gate to the north stood wide open. The people began to understand the pattern. Join the House of Islam and you are spared. Converted, they were absorbed. Remade as scholars, soldiers, and teachers. But for the nomads, the Fulani of Senegal and the Tuareg of the Central Sahara, isolation was no longer freedom. It was a death sentence. They adopted the faith not only for salvation, but for survival. Faith for grass, immunity from the law of the prey. They became the Torobe, the vanguard, carrying the goods, the cattle, and the code deep into the interior. Egypt was the gateway, but the north was the engine, a machine that consumed the conquered and returned them as the new conquerors. They were moving toward a world that was already awake, a world already highly civilized. In the forests, the great walls of Benin defied logic, a fractal city of earth and power, stretching 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. Its palace complex was larger than the entire city of Lisbon. In Timbuktu, long before the invaders arrived, the schools were already full. They studied the stars, mathematics, and metallurgy.
Yes, that aligns
a citadel
with the
of
great
science
river in the sky.
that did not need the north to teach it how to read. In Uganda, the Banyoro were masters of life. They performed cesarean sections with antiseptic precision, saving both mother and child, centuries before Europe learned to wash its hands. Along the riverbanks, the Soninke masters traded gold for salt without speaking a word. You place the gold and step away. The merchant from the north leaves the salt. If the exchange is fair, the trade is complete. A system built entirely on trust, practiced across the continent, in a world that still had honor. The engine didn't stop at the edge of the desert. It crept into the Sahel, rewriting the rules of survival. The law drew a line in the sand. On one side, the believer. On the other, the prey.
Straight through the gates.
Suddenly, kidnapping your neighbor was legal. as long as they hadn't knelt to the east. But the Mossi kingdom stood like granite. They saw the chains hidden in the scrolls. They refused to bow. Others were not so strong. Kings converted, not for faith, but for debt relief, selling their neighbors to pay foreign bills. They welcomed the traders into their cities. They gave them separate quarters, separate lives. But these guests were not just counting gold. They were counting the guards, not just drawing maps for trade. They were drawing the maps for war. South of Lake Chad, the Sao civilization built walled cities. They were remembered as giants, masters of clay and bronze. But the riders of Kanem brought a new law and a sharper sword. The giants fell, their history trampled into the clay. By the 11th century, the Chad Basin had become a terminal. In Kanem Bornu, capturing people became the business of the state. This was a place of horror. Men were mutilated, turned into eunuchs for foreign courts. Women were selected for distant masters. The choice was simple: join the machine or be harvested. Borno raided the south without end, feeding the hunger of the north and the Ottomans. The state became a slave to the stable.
You sleep too soundly, King Yaji. Borno has purchased war horses. You are vulnerable.
But we are Muslims. The law protects us. Brother does not enslave brother.
The law is ink. The horse is iron. Raid the south to buy horses, or be trampled by those who do.
But horses die in the heat. To keep the cavalry, raids became constant. In the 14th century, the shield of the savannah shattered. The Nupe cavalry, backed by northern ambition, razed Oyo Ile to the ground. The Yoruba crown was left in the ash, as the Alafin led his people into the deep safety of the forest. In exile, the Alafin understood. To reclaim the sun, they would need the horse, a jealous god that demanded human breath.
The Alafin stable is empty. Fill it with the lives of your youth, or we shall graze our horses on your graves.
We used to trade salt for stories. Now you trade my sons for a saddle. When did we stop being men?
This is the Maafa. The predator has become the gatekeeper. The heart is being traded away. And this was how the African Holocaust began.